Outside a small riverside town in Massachusetts, there was a small bakery nestled under the shade of an old oak tree. The old wooden sign hanging loosely in front of the door clearly read, "Maggie's Bakery." The bakery wasn't large, just enough to fit an old wooden table and a few wobbly chairs. But it was famous throughout the region for its fragrant, crispy bread and, more importantly, the kindness and goodwill of its owner. Maggie. Maggie was a woman over 60, with almost completely gray hair. But her eyes still shone with warmth and love. Those who had visited the bakery always remembered her gentle smile and familiar saying, "If you're hungry, come in, there's always bread, and no one goes hungry." To her, money wasn't everything. She believed that kindness could save lost souls. And every loaf of bread she gave away was not just to fill the stomach but also to warm the recipient's heart. That morning, the sun had just risen after a night of heavy rain. Michael, a skinny boy with bright eyes but a hidden sadness, walked into the bakery. He wore an old shirt with frayed shoulders, muddy pants, and held tightly in his hand a few small coins, enough to show that this was all he had. "Hello, ma'am," Michael said softly, as if afraid of disturbing the peaceful atmosphere of the bakery. Maggie looked up from the counter and smiled kindly. "Hello, dear. What kind of bread would you like?" Michael hesitated, looking at the display case where golden loaves of bread were neatly arranged. He licked his lips and then shyly asked, "Can I buy the smallest loaf, please?" Maggie looked at the boy, her eyes showing a hint of pity. She immediately realized that this boy was not a regular customer in town. Judging by his appearance, life must not have been easy. She smiled, took out a large, fragrant loaf from the cabinet, and carefully wrapped it. "Here you go, dear." She handed the loaf across the counter. Michael quickly rummaged through his pocket, counted each small coin, and handed them to Maggie. But when she saw the small amount of money, she just smiled, pushed his hand back. "No, I'm giving this to you. Take it." The boy was startled, his eyes wide with surprise. "But I have money. I don't want to beg." "I'm not saying you're begging, but I think you need this loaf more than that money. Here's the deal. Take it. And when you have a chance, do something good for someone else. Okay?" Michael looked at Maggie, his eyes brimming with tears. He bowed his head low and said softly, "Thank you, ma'am. I promise I will do something good. I promise." The boy hugged the loaf and left, his heart full of emotion. Maggie watched his small figure fade away down the dirt road, her heart suddenly tightening. Throughout her life, she had met many children like Michael, young kids who had to bear the burdens of life from a very early age. But she always believed that a seed of kindness, sown at the right time, could change a person's entire life. Michael walked along the muddy road. His hand gripped the loaf tightly as if he feared it would disappear if he loosened his grip. His steps led him to a small, dilapidated house at the end of the town. On an old, shabby bed lay his younger sister, Emily. Emily was only 8 years old but pale and thin. She had a congenital heart condition and needed medication every day to maintain her health. "I'm back, Emily," Michael said, smiling and trying to sound cheerful. He cut the loaf into small pieces and fed them to his sister one by one. Emily's eyes lit up. "Brother, this bread tastes so good today. Thank you." She smiled brightly, but Michael remained silent. He knew this loaf wouldn't last long. Tomorrow he would have to worry again about how to feed her. But at least, in this moment, seeing her smile made his heart feel lighter. That entire night, Michael tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He thought about his promise to Mrs. Maggie but also about the money he still owed to the gangsters, who had threatened to take their shabby house if he didn't pay. Despite being young, he understood the harshness of life. The next morning, Michael woke up early. It was still dark when he left home, carrying a basket full of empty bottles he had collected the previous day, planning to sell them at the market to earn some money for Emily's medicine. The streets were quiet, with only the crowing of roosters echoing in the air. As Michael passed by Maggie's bakery, he saw a faint light coming from inside. Mrs. Maggie had already risen early to prepare the bread. Michael paused for a moment. Peeking through the window, he saw her kneading dough, her eyes focused yet serene. A warm feeling crept into his heart. Michael continued walking, reminding himself that he must repay Mrs. Maggie. He had to accomplish that. But he didn't know that the journey to fulfill this promise would lead him to unexpected places. unfolding a story full of challenges, kindness, and unforeseen events. Michael left the market in the late afternoon. In his basket were a few small bills he had earned from selling bottles. The money wasn't much, but for Michael, it represented hope. He smiled, thinking about being able to buy more medicine for Emily or at least ensuring she had a better meal. As he walked along the road leading home, a strange noise suddenly caught his attention. Michael turned and saw a luxurious car parked on the roadside. A young, well-dressed man was struggling with the car, seemingly unsure how to fix it. Michael hesitated for a few seconds before deciding to approach. "Sir, what's wrong with the car?" Michael asked cautiously, unable to hide his curiosity. The man looked up at Michael with tired eyes. "It seems the engine is broken. I was on my way to the city. And now it's acting up." Michael looked at the car for a moment and then said, "I don't know how to fix cars. But I can help push it to a repair shop nearby. There's a skilled mechanic at the end of the town." The man was slightly surprised by the boy's offer but then smiled. "Thank you. If you help me, I'll pay you well." Michael shook his head. "I don't need money, sir. I just want to help." The man looked at Michael, his eyes filled with surprise and a bit of curiosity. "Why are you so kind?" Michael smiled gently. "Mrs. Maggie, the bakery owner in my town, taught me that if someone helps you, you should help others. I'm just following her advice." Together, they pushed the car along the village road. Despite the car's weight, Michael didn't complain. He only thought about this as an opportunity to fulfill his promise to Mrs. Maggie by helping others. When they reached the repair shop, the man took out his wallet to pay Michael, but he firmly refused. "I helped you because I wanted to, not for money." The man paused, sensing something special about the boy. He slowly asked, "What's your name? Where do you live?" "My name is Michael. I live at the end of the town. You can ask Mrs. Maggie." The man smiled, nodded, and patted Michael's head. "I'm John. Thank you, Michael. If I get the chance, I'll visit you." Michael didn't think much about John's words. He was just happy to have done a good deed. However, he didn't know that this encounter would lead to a series of significant events in his life. That evening, when Michael returned home and opened the door, a stranger was waiting in the dark. It was Tom, a henchman of a local gang. He was tall, with eyes as cold as steel. "Kid, how much did you make today?" Tom's voice was low and threatening. Michael stepped back, clutching his basket. I don't have enough money yet. Give me a little more time." Tom sneered. "How many times have you said that? My boss isn't going to wait forever. If you don't pay by the end of the week, don't blame me. This house and your sister won't be safe." Michael trembled but couldn't do anything. Tom walked away, leaving behind a heavy threat. Michael hugged his sister tightly, trying not to cry. He knew he had to do something but didn't have the strength to fight them. The next day, John returned to the town as promised. He went to Maggie's bakery to ask about Michael. Hearing about the boy's situation, John felt deeply moved. The story of a poor child bearing the responsibility of raising his sister reminded him of his own childhood. John had been an orphan abandoned in a shelter. Fortunately, he was adopted by a wealthy family. But life in that family was far from peaceful. When leaving the bakery, John decided to find Michael. He wanted to help the boy but didn't know how to make Michael accept his assistance. In the afternoon, when Michael was collecting bottles by the roadside, John unexpectedly appeared. "Michael, I'm here to thank you again," John said, smiling. Michael was surprised but politely replied, "You don't need to thank me, sir. I was just doing what I thought was right." John was silent for a moment and then gently asked, "Michael, is there anything I can help you with? I know your life isn't easy." Michael looked at John, his eyes showing determination. "Thank you, sir, but I don't want to be pitied. I just want to get through this on my own." Michael's response made John even more admiring of him. But he also understood that sometimes pride could be the biggest barrier to accepting help. John decided he wouldn't force Michael but wouldn't give up either. "All right, if you don't want to accept help, then may I invite you to work for me? I'm working on a charity project and I need some help. What do you think?" Michael hesitated. He didn't want to rely on others. But the idea of working to earn support seemed reasonable. After thinking for a while, he nodded. "I agree. What do you need me to do?" John smiled, his eyes full of hope. "We will help people like Mrs. Maggie. Those who always put kindness first. But first, I need you to trust me." Michael didn't know that this agreement would lead him into a series of dangerous challenges where kindness and faith would face dark forces. The journey was just beginning. In the following days after agreeing to work with John, Michael began a series of tasks he had never experienced before. John didn't disclose his entire plan but instructed Michael to help him gather information about the living conditions of poor families in the town. Michael went from house to house, asking questions and carefully noting everything from the number of people in each family, their living standards, to the difficulties they were facing. Initially, Michael was confused, not fully understanding why John wanted to do these things. But when he saw the grateful smiles of the villagers, he felt a quiet joy creeping into his heart. During his days wandering through the narrow alleys, Michael gradually realized that many people were struggling just like him. One late afternoon, Michael returned home and found John waiting at the door. In his hands was a small gift bag containing bread and medicine for Emily. Michael hesitated to accept it, but John just smiled and said it was a reward for his hard work. "You did well, Michael, but this is just the beginning. I want you to understand that sometimes kindness isn't just about giving a loaf of bread, but creating opportunities for others to stand on their own." Michael looked up at John, his eyes filled with admiration and unresolved questions. "Why are you doing all this? You don't seem like an ordinary person. You don't live in this town but you care so much." John was silent for a moment. Then he sighed softly, pulled a chair next to Michael, and looked into the distance. "When I was young, I was just like you," John began. "I was abandoned and had to live on the streets. At that time, I thought the whole world had turned its back on me. But then someone came along, who not only gave me a meal but also gave me the faith to keep living." Michael looked at John attentively, listening to every word. He had never heard such a story before. "That person told me that kindness isn't something we measure. It's small acts that have the power to change a person's entire life. So, I promised myself that when I grew up, I would come back to help children like I once was." Michael hesitantly asked, "So who is that person, sir?" John smiled gently, his eyes sparkling with emotion. "That person was Mrs. Maggie, the bakery owner you know." The answer surprised Michael. He had never thought that the simple woman at the small bakery could change someone's life like John's. Michael felt an invisible bond between him, John, and Mrs. Maggie. A bond woven from kindness. In the days that followed, John began involving Michael in various activities. They not only helped the poor but also organized free classes for the children in town. John hired teachers from the city and built a small classroom on the vacant land behind Mrs. Maggie's bakery. Michael was tasked with supporting the teachers, from preparing materials to watching over the children. One morning, while John and Michael were shopping at the market, they happened to meet Tom, the henchman of the gang that Michael's family owed money to. Tom glared at Michael with a threatening look, but when he saw John, his attitude abruptly changed, bowing and greeting in a servile manner. John sensed something was off and asked Michael, "Do you know him?" Michael hesitated, unsure how to respond, but John's gaze made it impossible for him to hide the truth. Michael recounted the whole story, from his family being forced into debt to the gang's threats. John listened without saying anything, then nodded. "Don't worry, I'll take care of this." Michael was surprised but didn't dare to ask more. John seemed capable of doing everything, and a vague sense of trust started growing in Michael's heart. That evening, when Michael returned home, he found his mother, who had left years ago, unexpectedly there. She looked haggard, her eyes full of remorse. She cried, apologizing for abandoning Michael and his sister. She said she had been trying to overcome her addiction and had come back to make amends. Michael felt both joy and anger, unsure what to do, but ultimately he decided to forgive her. However, Michael couldn't help but worry that her return would only increase the pressure of repaying the debt on their family. Just as Michael was feeling confused, John appeared. He took Michael outside to talk. "You have to be strong, Michael," John said. "I know everything is very difficult, but you are not alone. I promise to help you get out of this vicious cycle." "But what can we do? They are very dangerous," Michael asked, worried. John looked at Michael, his eyes resolute. "I've faced people like them before. The important thing is not to be afraid. Trust me, everything will be all right." Michael nodded, though he still had many doubts in his heart. But for the first time, he felt real hope. A hope built on kindness and trust among seemingly strangers. In the darkness, he clenched his fists tightly, determined to do whatever it took to protect his sister, his family, and those who believed in him. Kindness wasn't just a promise to Michael, it had become the purpose of his life. Michael didn't realize that his promise to John would lead him into a series of stressful and dangerous events. In the days following the encounter with Tom, the atmosphere in the town began to feel oppressive. The gang frequently appeared, lurking around Michael's house as if to remind him that the deadline to repay the debt was approaching. Michael became even more anxious when he saw his mother, who had recently returned after many years, still bore the marks of her old life. Even though she promised to change, Michael knew that old habits and mistakes wouldn't let her go easily. One evening, John called Michael to meet him at Mrs. Maggie's bakery. Inside the small space, the warm yellow light cast a soft glow. But Michael felt the tension looming. John looked at him thoughtfully, holding a thick document case. "Michael, I've done some further investigation into the people threatening your family," John said, his voice low and serious. "They're not just ordinary loan sharks. This gang has connections with bigger players in the city. And if we don't handle this correctly, the consequences could be severe." Michael swallowed hard, feeling a rising fear. "So what should we do, sir? I don't want Emily or my mother to be affected." John placed the case on the table and looked straight at Michael. "Do you trust me?" Michael nodded without hesitation. Despite not knowing much about John's past, he believed John was someone he could rely on. "All right," John continued, "I have a plan, but I need your cooperation. We won't pay them. Instead, we'll make them afraid to touch your family." Michael was surprised. "Not pay them? How will we make them back off?" John smirked. "They aren't as strong as they want others to think. They rely on fear to control people. If we turn the tables and make them afraid instead, everything will change." John explained his plan. Michael had to pretend to cooperate with Tom and the gang to gather important information about their illegal activities. John would use this information to report them to the authorities and simultaneously tarnish their reputation within the criminal world. However, this plan was risky. Michael would have to face Tom and other dangerous individuals directly while trying to keep himself safe. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," John said, his eyes serious. "I'll find another way. But if you do this, you must be extremely careful. One mistake, and you or your family could be in danger." Michael pondered for a long time. He thought about his mother, his sister Emily, and Mrs. Maggie, the people who trusted and helped him. If he did nothing, their lives would continue to be threatened by the gang. Finally, he looked up, his eyes determined. "I'll do it. I don't want to keep running away." John nodded, admiration shining in his eyes. "Good. We'll get through this together." A few days later, Michael started carrying out the plan. He deliberately approached Tom, pretending to accept his conditions. Michael said he wanted to cooperate to pay off the debt faster and offered to do odd jobs for the gang. Initially, Tom was suspicious, but Michael's cleverness and sincerity gradually won him over. In the following days, Michael was assigned small tasks like delivering goods or collecting money from other debtors. He silently observed and remembered everything John had instructed him. Every night, Michael would meet John to report what he had seen, from the gang's operating locations to the list of involved people. However, Michael did not anticipate that the plan would soon be uncovered. One evening, while Michael was delivering a bag of goods to Tom, Tom suddenly looked at him with cold eyes. "You seem pretty quick, Michael, but I feel like you're hiding something," Tom said, his voice full of suspicion. Michael tried to stay calm. "I just want to do a good job to pay off the debt, Mr. Tom. I don't dare think of anything else." Tom frowned but didn't say more. Nevertheless, Michael sensed danger approaching. That night, when Michael returned home, a group of strangers appeared. They seized Michael and his sister, taking them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts. Tom was waiting, holding a document case that Michael recognized well, the evidence he and John had gathered. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" Tom snarled, advancing towards Michael. "You dared to trick me, Michael, but now you're out of options." Michael held his sister tightly, trying to shield her. "Mr. Tom, I don't know what you're talking about. I was just doing what you told me." Tom laughed coldly. "You're clever, Michael, but unfortunately, you've chosen the wrong opponent." Just as Tom was about to order his men to teach Michael a lesson, The warehouse door burst open. John appeared with several plainclothes officers, their sharp eyes revealing their true identity as undercover police John had contacted earlier. "I think you're the one who chose the wrong opponent, Tom," John said calmly, stepping forward. "I've gathered enough evidence about you and your gang. You'd best surrender." Tom's face turned pale, but he wasn't ready to give up easily. He pulled out a knife and advanced towards John. However, before he could do anything, an officer swiftly subdued him, pinning him to the ground. Michael sighed in relief, holding his sister close. He couldn't believe how quickly everything had unfolded. John approached, placing a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder and smiling. "You did well, Michael. Everything will be all right now." Michael nodded, tears streaming down his face. He felt a sense of liberation, not just for himself but for his family and all those who believed in him. Kindness had not only helped him survive the trials but also helped him triumph over fear and injustice. John hugged Michael and whispered, "You did something that not everyone has the courage to do. I'm proud of you." In the dim light of the night, Michael felt that he had truly grown up, not just in his role as a brother but as a brave person who knew how to uphold kindness and trust in the most challenging times. As the first rays of dawn shone through Michael's window, the fresh air seemed to dispel all the worries and fears that he and his family had borne for so long. The dark days seemed to be behind them, making way for new hope and a new life. Tom's gang was arrested thanks to the cooperation between John and the police. Michael's family was no longer threatened. But more importantly, Michael realized that his own kindness and courage had set everything right. After the warehouse incident, John not only supported Michael financially but also helped him and his family rebuild their lives. First, he paid off the debt Michael's mother had incurred, freeing the family from the burden that had weighed them down for so long. Then, John took Michael's mother to the best rehab center in the area, where she received specialized care and treatment. She wept with gratitude when given the chance to start over, promising John and Michael that she would never disappoint them again. For his sister Emily, John took her to a large hospital in the city, where the best doctors examined and treated her. They discovered that Emily's congenital heart condition could be treated with surgery, a hope that Michael had never dared to imagine. John covered all the costs, not just because he could afford it, but because he considered Michael's family part of his own life. A month later, a special event took place in the town. John and Michael organized the grand opening of a new community center, built right on the land behind Maggie's bakery. This center was not only a place for free classes for children but also a venue providing meals, clothing, and support services for poor families in the area. John named the center Heartbeat of Hope, as a reminder of Emily's journey through illness and the importance of kindness in keeping the heartbeat of life steady. On the opening day, the townspeople flocked in large numbers. Everyone was joyful and grateful to John and Michael for bringing a new light to the community. Maggie, though her health had declined significantly, was brought to the event by John. When she entered the center and saw the children's paintings on the walls, the shelves full of books, and the radiant smiles of the children, she couldn't help but feel moved. John approached her and gently said, "Mrs. Maggie, this is a gift from me to you. You were the one who planted the first seed in my heart. And I want to keep planting many more seeds like this for future generations." Maggie smiled, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "John, I am proud of you and Michael. Both of you are proof that kindness can change not just one life but an entire community." Michael stood beside them, looking at Maggie and John. He said nothing, but his heart was filled with gratitude and pride. He realized he was no longer a lonely, skinny boy. He had become part of something bigger, a movement to spread kindness that Maggie, John, and now he himself were building together. As time passed, life in the town changed significantly. The Heartbeat of Hope Center became a hub for people to connect, where children learned, adults found support, and stories of kindness continued to unfold. Michael kept working with John, not just at the center but also in larger charitable projects in other regions. He learned a lot from John, not only about management but also about how to inspire others. One day, while writing in his journal, Michael reminisced about the tough times he had overcome. He had no regrets about any of it because he knew those challenges had made him who he was today. In Michael's heart, the images of John, Maggie, and his now healthy and happy sister Emily were a huge motivation for him to keep striving. As he closed his journal, Michael looked out the window at the bright blue sky, the vast fields of wheat, and the cheerful sounds coming from the community center. He smiled, feeling a sense of peace. Kindness is not just momentary acts, it is a continuous flow that spreads from person to person. From today to tomorrow, the story of Michael, John, and Maggie doesn't end here. It is just the beginning of a long journey where kindness becomes a beacon, lighting the path ahead and guiding them and those around them to a better future.